directors, staff, and members of the public joining us here and those watching online. I will now call this April 26, 2022 Committee of the Whole meeting to order. For those of you who might be joining or watching for the first time, Committee of the Whole meetings are informational only meetings when the entire board gathers to hear about and discuss a particular topic or topics. Often, as is the case tonight, the topic and ensuing discussion inform something that we'll vote on at some point. But we do not take any votes at the Committee of the Whole meeting. This evening, I do intend for us to finish early enough tonight so those who are breaking fast will have sufficient time to get where they need to be. Depending on the discussion, I'm aiming for us to adjourn around 7:15 or 7:30. Thank you. Clerk Inns, will you please call the roll for the record?
Director Arneson.
Here.
Director Alameen.
Here.
Director Ali. Here. Director Cirillo.
Here.
Director Inns is here. Director Caprini.
Present.
Student Representative Rance. Student Representative Wesson.
Present.
Chair Ellison.
Here, thank you. We have just one item on the agenda tonight, which is a presentation and discussion about capital planning and surplus buildings. Superintendent Graff, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Ellison. Good evening, Student Representative Wesson, directors, colleagues, and members of the public joining us here, as well as those of you joining us virtually. As mentioned tonight, we have a presentation. Senior Officer DeVette and Executive Director of Capital and Planning, Kurt Hartog, will be presenting information around our capital plan and surplus buildings. The intent here tonight is to give you some information around the modifications to the capital plan and then outline a recommendation regarding our surplus facilities in alignment with the process that was developed with our policy committee last year. So you will hear this information tonight, and subsequent to this presentation, you'll see that as part of our budget in May, and then moving forward from there based on board action. So with that, I will turn it over to Senior Officer DeVette and ask her to go ahead with the presentation.
Good evening, Chair Ellison, Superintendent Graff, Student Representative Wesson, and members of the board and the community listening tonight. Thank you for the opportunity to walk through our next year of our 5-year capital plan. So we're coming up on year 3 of the 5-year capital plan that we adopted. And we have some updates for you as far as current capital planning, the projects that will happen this summer. And then, as Superintendent Graff mentioned, an update to the capital plan for the 22-23 fiscal year. But just wanted to start with something really positive. What you have on the screen here is a rendering of what North High School in North Minneapolis will look like as we complete that 4-year project. We've started this year with the CTE Center, and then in the next subsequent, this coming year, in the next 3 years, funding some significant improvements to that building. Kurt will talk, Executive Director Hartog will talk more about that as we get to our current projects to give you some more insights into that. With that, though, I'm going to turn it over to Executive Director Hartog to talk about, start us off with projects happening this summer.
Thank you, Senior Officer DeVette. Just a quick overview of what we're planning for the summer of 22 in the capital construction space. The North High Facility, CTE Center, about a $43 million improvement. We're committed to have CTE by 23. So the fall of 23, we anticipate the CTE Center to be open at North High School. To give you a perspective, that's on the west side of the existing North High School. That's where we'll start the renovation. In order to do that, we've got to move, obviously, a lot of things, including the radio station, the weight room, the dance studio, and second floor, and teen parent services. So I think we've got a plan to do all that and shuffle all the cards and get them to the right space. We are planning to issue construction documents on May 27th for bidding purposes. And then plan to proceed likely in August to start off with renovation on the west side of North High School. And of course, that will continue for the next 3 or 4 years in subsequent phases. And we'll talk about more of that. There's a slide just about CTE and the North High School renovation coming up in this presentation in a little while. Anderson, the renovation project, will be going on this summer, mostly science labs, around science labs, and we're doing some preliminary work to create a lunchroom space and kitchen space along with a common space like an auditorium, so a cafetorium kind of project. That's a multi-year project as well. We did add to the scope of services this year some sound deadening panels in the band room at the request of the school. So we will be adding those as well this summer to make that a better place for the students. The Hall Observatory, the dome is on order. It's being manufactured now. There was a very long lead time for that dome. It should arrive in July. We're starting here in about 2 weeks to start moving furniture to create the space for the observatory, a very exciting project. I think we're the second observatory in K-12 space in Minnesota. So it'll be a very, very exciting project. The Marcy Black Box and Dance Space is also scheduled for this summer. There is a spring floor that has been delayed. That's a dance floor that's been delayed. We're working with the contractor to speed that up, but we're continuing the rest of the work to create the black box and the dance space at Marcy. The Bethune Theater, underway right now. They're doing soil work right now to make a foundation. The panels, precast panels are on order. They should be arriving in June or July, and then we'll start constructing the theater portion of the project. The Sullivan Robotics Lab, that has been awarded, and that is underway. We're going through the process right now. We converted a media center at Sullivan Anishinaabe into a robotics space, and that's well on schedule and will be completed by school next year. Pillsbury Safe and Welcoming Entrance, another project, putting a new safe and welcoming entrance at Pillsbury. Again, that project's underway and it's on schedule. Lucy Laney, we're finishing up a lighting project. That was a multi-year project with their safe and welcoming entrance at Lucy Laney. The second floor is getting all new LED lights, and so we're switching out all the fluorescents for all new LED lights on the second floor. That work is going to proceed some at night. It may start early, but we've talked to our electrical contractors to shift the schedule to allow us to still have classes there. We have a district-wide flooring program. We've identified 3 particular sites that need flooring upgrades, and that includes the Heritage Wilder site that is going to get new flooring. Anthony Middle School and Northeast Middle School will also be getting new flooring this summer. Our goal is to put washers and dryers in every school in the district. We are about 15 washers or dryers short. We've ordered them. They're scheduled to come in by June, and then we'll start assembly and installation of those. We should have everything, all schools should have a washer and dryer that functions by the start of school next year. Barton Entrance has started and then stopped and restarted. So we are working through that with Barton. That's a new safe and welcoming entrance project, new office area, and that project is well on schedule. We do expect a little bit going into September in unoccupied space. There's always that finish work that we're going to have to get done in September, but we've worked with the school staff and the school leadership, and we think we can make that happen by September, October. Hale Kitchen renovation's been awarded. We're ordering kitchen equipment, which isn't being delayed at this point, and so that's on schedule as well to do a new kitchen lunchroom at Hale. The Anthony entrance is a 2-year project. It starts this year with a new stairwell on the south side, and then we're putting in a new safe and welcoming entrance on that southwest corner of Anthony, and that should be proceeding on schedule. It's a multi-year project. And then, of course, Nellie Stone Johnson and Wyndham are getting new furnitures for the schools, new desks, new student desks, new teacher desks, both at Nellie Stone Johnson and Wyndham. We are seeing some supply chain challenges with furniture, but we're way ahead of the game, so we feel we're going to meet that August date.
Thank you, Executive Director Hartog. Just a little bit, though. I mean, Kurt mentioned supply chain, and I think it's pretty well documented in the media and other places that across the country, and in fact globally, we are seeing supply chain delays. So we are going to need to delay some of the projects that we had scheduled for this summer. Part of it is supply chain. Part of it, frankly, is availability of contractors. as work is picked back up in the Twin Cities, and then some delays in getting contracts done. So you'll see here a list of projects that are not going to be able to start this summer or continue this summer as we had planned. Burroughs Kitchen Flooring and Lighting, which is pretty self-explanatory. Lindale is getting all new ventilation, and this is a 3-year project that started last summer. We ran into a fair amount of asbestos abatement needs based on the 60s era construction. It's not creating any unsafe conditions for anyone in the school right now, but because of the time needed to do the abatement and do the next section of the ventilation installation, we simply don't have enough time this summer to start that project without pushing it way out into the start of the school year. Our staff there came back last year with just a week or so left in the summer to get rearranged and moved into the new classrooms. So given all of our experiences over the course of the last 2 years, we're going to push that project out another season. Supply chain is impacting us on the ventilation improvements at Sheridan and Pratt. We do have on order the equipment that needs to be installed, but we don't have it yet, and so we will not be able to do that project this summer, and we'll delay that one. Same with Field. With the Field Elementary, we had a problem there with contractor availability. Both Field and Burroughs actually getting enough bids back that were within our budget. So we think we'd find more favorable conditions if we wait a year. So we're going to delay on those. Kenny Kitchen, in order to do the kitchen project at Kenny, we need to replace the roof. The Kenny roof is still wood beam, right? And needs to replace with steel. So with the delay in the steel market, we'd be looking at doing a roofing project when students are back in September. That just is, craning products and things like that is just something we try to avoid during the school year. So we'll be delaying that. And then the Winona lunchroom from a supply chain perspective, and then the Northrop entrance. Along with just fully delayed projects, there are a couple that we need to modify scope, and I'll let Kurt talk about that again.
Thank you. Justice Page, entrance, we are modifying the scope slightly, and it's around the science rooms that we are going to try to determine how best to get those done while this building is occupied. The entrance is on schedule, should be ready to go, but I think some of those interior improvements, we're working with school staff to see how best can we get that done without impacting learning. And so we're working through that to modify that. The clocks, fire alarms, and PAs at Washburn, Hall, Northeast, and Northrop, those are modified. We are looking at off-cycle work to get those done. That would be having a contractor come in at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and work until 11 o'clock at night to get those done. And we're also looking at some overtime around those projects just to make sure they are completed, especially around the fire alarm piece. It's pretty extensive to rewire a school like Northeast Middle School for a fire alarm and a PA. And so we're really trying to work hard with our contractors to find solutions to get those projects done, which is going to be a modified schedule. If the fire alarm doesn't obviously operate, you can't have occupancy in the building. And so we're working hard with them. And I think we're there on a solution.
There are just a few projects that Director Hartog has touched on already that would just take a few minutes, trying to be cognizant of our time here, to do a little deeper dive into some of the projects that specifically support a couple of our magnet programs and then North High.
And you can see the Hall STEM Academy Observatory, the rendering there. This is on the south side of Hall STEM Academy, facing Franklin. So it's right on that south side is where we're putting that observatory. We're taking out basically a teacher's lounge and relocating that and putting the observatory in there. Again, the dome is being manufactured. We've got a contractor on board, and we're ready to go with that. We're just working through some of the drawings and approvals that we need to do with the contractor to get the project fully going and ready once school is over. The Bethune Arts Elementary School, there's an exterior improvement there, and that's called the theater, which you see here. That theater also is a storm shelter. So it will serve as a storm shelter for if we do have a tornado or a weather event. It serves as that. We're also doing renovations to the band room, choir room, dance room, and we're also putting a new fire alarm in that building as well. We've worked with staff. We started the fire alarm work already, putting conduits in. And we should have precast by June, which is a precast panel that makes the auditorium, and they'll start assembling that. So right now they're just working on their foundation. And finally, the North High School renovation CTE Center. We've identified our construction manager, and that would be Kraus Anderson. We went through a process to select a construction manager, Kraus Anderson. They're helping us with phasing and sequencing and supply chain and all those issues in construction to help us make a better product and a more cost-effective product about how that goes about. So right now we're looking at about 3 phases of work, with the first phase being CTE, and then of course the second phase, and that James Avenue will be basically the new entrance, the new lunchroom, the new meeting space. So that'll be a glass entrance right there. Where James Avenue is now, there'll be an outdoor dining space for North High School right in that space. So it'll be, and then we're doing an auditorium renovation as well at that space. So, and significant mechanical upgrades in the building as well, plus adding daylighting. So it doesn't have a lot of windows now. It's going to have a lot more windows when we're done.
Thanks, Kurt. So in summary, a couple of things. We are Sorry, I forgot my mic again. That is outlined in the attachment to this presentation, and you can see how that $64 million is spread. Some of the change, this is a reduction of just over $21 million to what we originally had in year 3 of our 5-year plan. And so you can see here specifically what we're reducing. We're reducing the investment in technology. We do have and have identified money from previous bonds that need to be used for that purpose. And so we'll be spending those bonds down before bonding for more for technology. We're also removing just over $800,000 for fleet replacement. And the same thing, we've identified funding from previous bonds that's specifically attached to fleet replacement. And projecting kind of the process for purchasing school buses and other district fleet, we don't think that we can spend that money down in time to receive more. And so we're going to remove that bonding. And then as you heard us talk about those projects being delayed from this summer and being pushed into later years, we have a capacity concern of being able to start the projects as they are originally scheduled, whether it's internal capacity from a project management perspective, finding consultants and contractors to help us with those. So it is prudent, and it is our recommendation that we delay bonding for these 3 projects. Otherwise, we'll be getting money into our bond accounts, starting paying debt service on those when we know we can't start the project at the timeline that we thought we would. And there is a limit on how long we can hold on to that money without spending it as well. But it's really prudent to do that because debt service is a general fund expense for us. So to inflate it before we can actually reasonably start these projects seems to make sense to delay it. And you know, the debt that we carry affects our debt to income ratio and our bond rating as well. So taking a year to kind of right size the work that we believe we can get done in this marketplace is our recommendation. And it's important to note that this is bonded money for specific purposes that are outlined in state statute. It cannot be used for other uses throughout the district. It needs to be spent specifically in the way the state statute lays it out. And in fact, you know, if we want to move money from one project to another, that requires board approval. And certain types of funding streams have different approval, both from the board and from the Minnesota Department of Education. So in summary, around the capital plan, this is very similar to what we mentioned last year. Board action will be needed to approve the updated plan. That'll come forward as part of the budget in May and June. And this is our typical process to reevaluate annually what we have coming forward in the capital bond, where we sit with our current projects. And I also think it's important for us to have a conversation about our investment priorities and what other emerging needs we may see. You know, we have people come forward with different requests about things they'd like to see in their building that requires capital investment. So periodically, we'd like to take a look at where we're investing money and if that's still consistent with the priorities that we planned against. So both a projection and a snapshot of what we know at this time, and we continually work to update that. We are required to bring forward a multi-year capital plan. So as I mentioned in the beginning, this is year 3 of the 5-year plan. So next year, we do need to add a year to the plan. So it's a great time to hear feedback from community and from board members about what investment priorities you'd like us to look at in the coming years. And that is the capital plan piece. I don't know if you want to pause here for questions before we move into surplus buildings, or just have me keep going.
Directors, do we have any questions? Yep. Director Soria?
I guess I have my,
No, okay.
my time.
Director Caprini?
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Could you repeat what you said about the technology piece? I wanted to just hear that again.
Right. The 5-year plan had $10 million a year to invest in technology across the district for equipment and devices. We currently have balance in previous bonds that have not yet been spent that will carry us through this year. And in fact, next year, most of the way next year in that budget. So rather than add to the balance that we have and begin paying debt service on that, we're proposing that we don't bond. We use up the funds that are sitting there already to fulfill that need for the next year.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yep.
And then one last question, and not tonight, but another day. Is it possible for us to get a list of schools that either are in need of air conditioning or ventilation? And I say to this simply because of COVID and you know what's up.
Yeah, absolutely. Director Hartog, Executive Director Hartog does have an updated study for all of our current buildings that are in operations that are not air conditioned in all the classrooms. So we have that, and we can make that available to the board, and what the investment would need to be in today's dollars.
Thank you. I was just actually going to ask for that.
Pretty
last part.
significant.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we're at, with the closure of Tuttle, I think we're at 13 buildings that are not, is that correct, Kurt? I got the number right? That are not fully air conditioned, and these are the remaining ones are the ones that are more difficult to do. As probably is not a surprise, the price tag is pretty high. As we move forward with the ventilation project at Sheridan, we're actually doing that in a way that that building will be air conditioned. So that will tick one off that list as well once we're able to do that work.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Student Representative Wesson?
Thank you for your presentation. I just had a quick question. So in regards to like gender neutral bathrooms, like Director Caprini has mentioned about air conditioning. Has there been any movement on identifying buildings that don't have gender neutral bathrooms or that need upgrading, so we can provide an accessible and safe space to all MPS students? As I've been seeing students have concerns around gender neutral bathrooms in their buildings. So has there been any movement on that or anything about that? Thank you.
Thank you, Student Representative Wesson. That's an example of the investment priorities and emerging needs that we need to continue to discuss. As we do projects, and this started, I think, back in 2018, as we do projects, we are making sure that in any new projects, we're bringing gender-neutral bathrooms in part of it. These are not inexpensive projects because of plumbing and needing to relocate. So it is on our list of emerging priorities that we need to address, along with air conditioning, some athletic facility needs. And I don't know, Kurt, you have anything you want to add to that? Nope. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Ali?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is about heritage. I've seen that heritage is not on your presentation, though you have mentioned it about it. Are you talking about welder? Is that the heritage?
Yes, this particular funding, this 4.7 million, is for a new safe and secure entrance for the building, which would include heritage.
And that's part of the welder building?
That's part of the Wilder building, correct?
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I just wanted to know that. So thank you.
Thank you. Director Caprini?
Thank you, Chair Ellison. As we get to that point where the capital improvement plan is going to need to be extended, I hope that Henry's athletic field is on the list for running water, concessions, track, and all of those things that, well, no, we had a new track. We do, so concessions and running water. I just hope that that's something that's emerging as well. Thank you.
Yeah, just a comment on that, Director Cabrini. There's been several athletic facilities that we've looked at. As you probably are aware, the press boxes are not all that friendly anymore. So we did a study on the press boxes. We are looking right now at Roosevelt's track surface, much like Henry's was last year, to replace Roosevelt's track surface. We did Southwest. Washburn's turf is in need, and that is an emerging issue. It's exceeded its useful life, the Washburn turf, so we're working on that. We're also working on the Hennepin County Youth Sports grants to help us with those projects, but definitely Henry is, when we redid that track at Henry, we set it up for when they get turf, so we don't have to do a bunch of additional work to put turf in.
And concessions and running water.
And concessions and running water, yes, yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, one of the challenges with that is bringing water and sewer from where it's located in the street. So that'll have a budget impact, but it is on the list for athletic upgrades.
Thank you. Superintendent, Director Soria.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I do have a concern, and I don't think necessarily this will be a question to you two directly, but I see some renovations in some schools in the kitchen, which is great. However, I'll give you an example. At Emerson, we have a brand new kitchen that still is not being used because we are understaffed. We still need to have one more person. So that's really a big concern for me into like how we are being very active and mindful to ensure that if we bring all these new facilities, we have the individuals that are gonna be running a kitchen. So it's more like a comment that I have and a concern. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Director Inns.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was wondering if you could comment on the Roosevelt air conditioning renovation. I know that's the only large high school that doesn't currently have air conditioning, and I know it keeps getting pushed back. That has a significant impact on a lot of things, summer programming, other stuff. I think the more we push it back, the more expensive it gets. So I'm just kind of wondering what our plan is with respect to that.
So that one gets a little technical. Roosevelt is probably, in a layman's term, is probably one of our most difficult and expensive buildings to air condition. Kurt has had it studied, so I'll let you just give a 10,000-foot summary of what you found.
Oh, thank you. Well, to Senior Officer DeVette's point, very, very expensive because of the age of the ventilation equipment there. Now, as you may be aware, part of it is already air conditioned. We added a part to the east that already has air conditioning in part of it. And if you drive by Roosevelt, you'll see what we call window shakers, a lot of the window air conditioning. But to air condition that building would be comparable to what we did at Henry, where we have to add in all the ductwork, we have to add in all the controllers, all the air handling equipment. And so it's not a small undertaking in a building of that age to do that. And I think at Henry, and I also think we did it at Edison High School, the same thing. It's a 3-4 year project that's, probably pushing 60 million in that ballpark now to bring in the cooling equipment for that building. So it's been studied. We understand, we know the pathway we have to go to make that air conditioned. And so it's really around a funding and timing issue and a priority issue for that school to receive air conditioning. I hope that answered your question, Director.
I don't know if it really answers my question. I mean, I asked for a comment, but none of that really. I mean, we need to have that building be air conditioned as far as I can. I mean, if you're a student in there, and I mean, it's an issue. It's something that needs to happen. It's not like we're not using Roosevelt High School, right? And so I don't know that all these reasons why we haven't been, that doesn't convince me that in the future it's going to be air conditioned, right? What you did is just convince me that it's not going to be air conditioned in the future. You told me all the reasons why it's not going to be air conditioned. So that's not really the answer that I was hoping to hear. So
I appreciate that, Director Inns. Again, it's, I think the price tag for, in today's dollars for the remaining buildings in total is $168 million in today's dollars. So it does come down to what we set as priorities and finding available funding and knowing that we're going to have to set aside some of the other things we want to do in order to get that done. And we'll be looking for, direction from the board on how to proceed. We do have what we call a priority matrix for investment that looks at several different attributes for trying to decide where to put what. I mean, 60 million sounds like a lot of money, but when you start looking at the projects that we're able to complete and the impact to the overall district budget, we can't get everything done that people are looking for. So, for instance, Roosevelt, in what you're seeing in today's dollar, will take the whole bond year. And that's fine, but there's some trade-offs with that we will need to have some dialogue and input about. So I don't think anybody's saying that it's not on the list and not on the radar. It's just where can we fit it in and, the other priorities that we can't support.
okay, well, thank you. I appreciate that answer.
Yeah.
Okay, and I didn't mean to be confrontational, but just.
No, I didn't take
Okay,
it.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Director Inns. Superintendent Senior Devet, that was all the questions on capital planning.
All right. Let me keep going. All right. The next topic is also one that I think there'll be some interest in. As Superintendent Graff mentioned, last fall we worked with the policy committee and then the full board to update the policy and through the regulation provide a process by which we would look at our surplus buildings. I did include all of the information from August in the appendix to this presentation, but there were just a few slides that we thought we'd go through just as background because it has been several months since we talked about this. And then we can move into what our recommendations would be from an administrative perspective. We currently have 7 facilities that are not used for instruction. 6 of them that you can see here on the list also do not have an active lease. We do have a tenant at Lincoln. That's where our Miro robotics field is, and I think the board's been made aware that we're looking to formalize that arrangement. But this is our facilities that are vacant. In most cases, we're using them for storage, if not full-time storage, intermittently, as we have supplies come in that are on their way to being installed, such as all of the filters for the 26,000, something like that, filter units that we need throughout the district. So there is uses for some of our buildings because we don't have sufficient warehouse space. People have a sense that our empty buildings cost us a lot of money, and in total, $275,000. Don't get me wrong, is not a decent chunk of change. But we operate these buildings, basically keep the heat and light on, so the utility systems will continue to run. But what we do know is the demographic projections suggest that MPS will not need these facilities in their entirety for instructional purposes in the near future. And I would also share that all of the schools listed here, Willard, Gordon, Hamilton, Cooper, they actually closed in 2005. And I didn't pull enrollment data back that far, but in 2009, our enrollment was right around 33,000, and we had these buildings closed and did not need all of these buildings for instruction. Lincoln closed in 2007, so I think it's interesting to think about how long they've been closed and haven't been used for instructional purposes. So the regulation that accompanies this policy establishes the process and the parameters for how you might decide to dispose in a way that is intentional and has a transparent plan for community to follow. So this is the policy and the regulation. I don't need to read it to you. I just wanted to include it in this presentation just as a reminder that we have just recently reviewed that and updated that. So where we are at today is coming to you to talk about what facilities we would recommend that we designate as surplus. And some of the factors that we talked about last fall that would form our recommendation, such as where they sit in the city, whether or not we feel like we need swing space, how much swing space do we need for emergencies or construction delays, what might we do with that property, like its land and its potential future uses. I already talked about storage and warehousing. And then, of course, and Kurt will have the technical information in a few minutes, but the building condition and the cost to bring it back online. We also talked last fall about parameters that we recommend we consider for purchase or lease, so that we have some way to predict how those facilities may be used in the future. We certainly want to make sure that if we do declare something as surplus, it's not hindering our own mission and goals for our district. The person who is looking to, lease or buy the property needs to present an achievable or sustainable plan. Definitely, we need to make sure there's community support for whatever the intended use of a surplus facility might be under somebody else's ownership or leaseholder. And you can kind of see, there's certainly zoning, liability, and that the specific board director also needs to agree that this is a good direction to go should we decide to sell or lease a vacant building going forward. So these are the kind of priorities that we're recommending, that we recommended in our regulation that are considered. You can see them here. They're the same that we saw in the fall. But we'd like to see it support students. We'd like to see it support affordable housing and address homelessness, meet the goals of the city's comprehensive plan, and be working with public entities in the priorities of considering an offer for sale or lease. I'll let Mr. Hartog go through the more technical pieces of this slide. It's kind of an eye chart, so.
Right. It is kind of an eye chart. I think the key point here is that to bring these facilities back into a position to hold students and to have students and have a learning environment that's conducive to students is expensive. The buildings have been closed for a while. They've been maintained, but really haven't been improved. And so what we're looking at here is really the estimated cost that we would need to bring those buildings up to a condition where they would be classified really as a school or a learning space. Obviously, Victory Memorial Ice Arena is not in that space. We've had a study done on Victory Memorial Ice Arena to bring it back to an ice arena. And again, not a small amount of money there, 6 to 14 million. The only comment on this one is there's just a little math error on Gordon. It should be about 10.3 million to bring Gordon back into investment, not 17.5. And so just note that. But not a small investment. Then would take multiple years to do those investments at a building. We just, it's very difficult for us to get, $20 million worth of improvements done on a building quickly. But it could happen if that's the direction of the board.
All right, thanks. And then the big reveal. These are the buildings that administration is recommending that you consider to declare as surplus for sale or lease. And I think it's interesting, I mentioned that our buildings have been closed since 2005/7, and what our enrollment was at the time we closed those buildings. We're at approximately 30,000 this year, and demographics don't suggest that we're going to see a swift uptick. We also do have a higher than average or higher than the guidelines for MDE in square footage per student throughout the district. So that's good to consider as well. The other thing about declaring these surplus for sale or lease to consider is land is a precious commodity in Minneapolis. And so we have to consider what happens if we let some of it go. And that's part of the reason why we're only recommending these 3 instead of looking at all of our surplus buildings. So you can see here, Willard, Tuttle, and Gordon are the 3 that we're recommending. I think the other thing just to think about as you consider the recommendation, it's not, we took a little walk back in the archives, and this conversation is not one that hasn't happened in Minneapolis Public Schools over time. And I was a little surprised by this. In the past 100 years, the district has closed, torn down, sold, or otherwise terminated nearly 90 buildings, which is more than we currently operate today. Some of those, and it wasn't fast. It didn't happen steadily over time. 13 school buildings, I'm going to just take you a little walk through history. 13 school buildings in 1942. 11 more between 65 and 68 were no longer instructional buildings. Between 72 and 84, you see like the other 45. So it's been a little while, I understand, since we've disposed of any property. And so I think that's what we're here. And as we looked at closing those buildings, there's a percentage of how many were kind of kept for future district use. A few may have reopened, and then closed or reopened again. And then interesting to look at, I thought it was interesting as well to look at where they went. Some of them became sites for the Park and Recreation Board in Minneapolis. Some were incorporated into the University of Minnesota's footprint. Some of them, unfortunately, became part of the new freeway system in Minneapolis, and we know what that has done to many of our neighborhoods. And I think what our assessment is the greatest number or proportion were actually rebuilt for housing throughout the city, which was much needed. So not to suggest that these decisions are easy or it's ever a pleasant exercise to think about, declaring a school building as surplus, but it also contributes to the rich history in Minneapolis. And so I thought that was interesting to think about when you start considering, selling or leasing more property. These are the sites that we're recommending that we maintain for the time being. Hamilton does have an active lease through 2024 with the city. So that should be something that we start talking about within the next 12 to 18 months. Cooper and VMIA, we do use for storage. We've got temporary storage that's needed for equipment for a variety of different things across the district, whether it's music equipment that kind of travels around the district and has a home when it's not being used. There's some furniture, fixture, and equipment that we keep in reserve in case we need it. So Cooper has a lot of that sort of equipment in it. VMIA is a nice wide open space and affords us an opportunity for early purchase of construction materials. I mentioned the 26,000 filters that we replace on a regular basis. All that has to come in, get delivered, and then be dispersed and installed. So facilities does make use of VMIA as a storage space. And then Lincoln, I already mentioned, does house the Mura Field right now, and we're working to formalize that agreement. As well as it is our building that we could quickly occupy. And, we have to move furniture in, we have to do some other things, but it's been maintained in a space that if we needed swing space or there was an emergency, we could, within probably 2 to 4 weeks, is kind of what we estimate, move students into Lincoln if need be. So that's why that's kind of the reasoning behind us recommending we keep these 4 sites in the district portfolio for now. And that is our discussion. So we would be bringing forward a resolution to declare those buildings, those 3 buildings, Willard, Gordon, and Tuttle, as surplus. And then we would start the process for seeking proposals from the public sector for how those buildings might be repurposed.
Thank you. Board directors, hit your request to speak button if you have any questions or comments. Director Caprini?
What year did you say was it 1970 to 84? That it was the number of buildings that were closed that I'm interested.
What our walk through the archive showed is between 72 and 84, we closed approximately half of that 90, so about 45.
Okay, my house was one of those houses. It's where the Franklin Field is.
Okay.
It was purchased by MTS. Became Franklin. Then it was a different school, and then it closed. So I'm glad to see that we were able to get Franklin reopened, and it still is a special space for me, that field. On my mom's birthday, we always drive by.
Yeah.
So just when you brought up that, I was just like, wow, 45, that's a lot of schools.
And I think we recognize that there can be a lot of emotion and historical attachment to these places. But I think too, thinking about having a vacant building sitting in your neighborhood is also something to consider as you think through and you talk to your communities about this recommendation.
Thank you.
Director Arneson?
Thank you. Thanks for being here, and thanks for. I'm glad that we're doing this. I'm glad that we're doing this process. I think that I just really haven't met anybody who really hopes that they can live next to an empty school building. So I think it's a good idea for us to be thoughtful about why they're empty, if there's a purpose for them, and if there isn't, I think it's good to name that so that neighbors have the opportunity to talk about that and vision something different for their neighborhood. So I've been talking a little bit specifically when we talk about Tuttle. I've been talking some to the southeast Como neighborhood, which is where Tuttle is located, and they're actively meeting and talking about this. They're talking with their local council member. We've been in conversation, and they very much enjoyed Heritage as a school, as their neighbors, but they understand that there was limitations in the Tuttle building that did not allow Heritage students, that they are better served in a different building. So they understand and want what is best for the Heritage students, and they also are in the process of imagining what might be their new neighbors. And as such, in the meeting, they actually had a couple of questions that I said I would ask here tonight and talk about publicly. So on the slide 14, there's a slide that says priorities considered. And the last bullet point says interested party is a public entity. And they were just wondering if we could define what that means to us when we say that. Priorities considered, interested party is a public entity. So I can imagine what we mean by a public entity, but if we could kind of articulate if we're looking for a public entity to be making the offer, or what that means to us.
Yeah, I think it's specifically, it kind of goes back to the other priorities for use, that the considerations for use that we're looking at. So housing, things to support community around there, affordable housing, let me say, things to support the community and the surrounding neighborhood, things that support our students. I think by omission, we're really not looking for private developers per se that might want to build, different kind of housing besides affordable housing that helps serve our community.
I think what they're talking about, and when you talk to kind of, and especially involve CPED and the city councils, sometimes there is a combination, like sometimes affordable housing is subsidized, but it is not always exclusively public dollars. So I think they're just kind of seeking, I think you've answered the question, but I think they were just kind of seeking a little bit more expansion on that, given that they're actively trying to explore what's happening. The other thing related to that question, I think, as they kind of talked through the priorities considered, they are assuming, we were discussing, and I think reached the conclusion, but please correct me if I'm wrong, that we are looking for these like points of that. We are not necessarily looking for one project to exhaust all of the things on the list, right? Yeah. For example, it might be challenging to have a project that would have both affordable housing and something specifically that would support. They were trying to figure out, do we need to bring in a tutoring project and housing, but rather housing support students, and so we were just wanting to clarify that.
Yeah, I think it lays out some guidelines for us to consider in reviewing an offer that we have in front of us. But no, it's not supposed to be intended that somebody can bring us this whole bundle of services in one fell swoop. Yeah,
that's right. Okay, so wanting to clarify that. Okay, thank you. And then just wanting to just make a comment about VMIA, and I understand that we're using it for storage, but just being just having been on the board the moment that we needed to close VMIA, and again understanding that there's some structural challenges, wanting to name that out loud, that there was some pretty significant in the refrigeration, the ice in the refrigeration was no longer in compliance with state guidelines, and it's just as far as hockey rinks, it was definitely a situation where it was far more cost to rehab it than a new rink would be. But speaking of land shortage, just wanting to just kind of acknowledge it's not our mission to create recreational facilities, but I do know that it did take away that ice. It has made it harder for young people in North and Northeast Minneapolis to have access to hockey, which is not a particularly diverse sport. So I know that I know the park board has thought about that, and just wanting to kind of acknowledge that's a space. And one day, if we find a different place to store our ventilators or our ventilation system, that perhaps that will be an opportunity to collaborate with some of our other public entities to address that very real recreational, I guess, gap in our city.
Yeah, and I think we had some early discussions about just that with the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board, and we did commission a small feasibility study to reopen it as an ice arena, and I think that's the numbers that Mr. Hartog had there. It is one of the last structures of that kind, and there was an interest in what's the word I'm looking, refurbishing it back to its previous condition, and we do know that ice time in Minneapolis is also a premium. So I think there's room to continue to have that conversation as well. We use it currently for storage, but it's property that we're not recommending we let go of yet.
Correct, and I'm not really advocating for that. And there, just to be clear, that the park board has some opportunities as well to address this issue with their own facilities. And so, not meaning to digress us on a whole hockey conversation, but it is important to name that, I think, when we talk about VMIA. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Director Soria?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So for these buildings that are being recommended to be sold or leased, what are the limitations that we have into how is it that we can invest, reinvest, or use this money? Because you said there are some limitations.
Limitations on the use of a proceed?
Yes.
Yes. So the way the statute reads is if we sell the property, we need to apply those proceeds to the debt service that may still exist on that property. So there is specific state statute on what we can do with those proceeds.
Can you name that statute? I'm sorry.
Not off the top of my head, but we can get you that information.
That would be great if you can email
you
that.
don't know it off the top of your head, do you? No. I'll
Thank
follow
you.
up with you, Director Surreal.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Director Elamine?
Thank you, Madam Chair and the board here for the information. So I have a couple questions. Being the one really to target toward the Gordon Center, I know there's quite a few community members that's been looking at that building. And I'm wondering here where it says intended use does not hinder NPS mission, goals, or operation. But then I also think about North Minneapolis and the need within our community for stronger academic programs, for after school, before school, for safe space, for life skills to be taught, and all these different things that community members are trying to establish a place or a location where this can take place. So I'm just wondering if you can dive just a little bit deeper into when you say intended use does not hinder exactly, or maybe even give an example in regards to that.
Yeah, no, I think that, thank you for the question, Director Elamine. I think the types of supports that you're outlining are exactly what we'd be looking for, or the board would be looking for, if you would, in a lease arrangement or a sale arrangement. I think the thing to consider is Mr. Hartog showed us kind of what it would take to bring them back to instructional purposes, but even to bring them back to an occupancy level will require investment. So truthfully, we need in a lease or a sale situation, we would need someone who's interested in investing in some of that basic deferred maintenance and accessibility monies that are on that chart. Maybe not the educational adequacy pieces, depending on how they wanted to use the building. And I think, I don't know that we would expect there to be a large profit from selling some of these buildings, given their condition and what we're looking to have them sold for. But to really kind of cut to the chase, I don't think, and again, this is a matter for the board to deliberate on, but I don't think, a charter school lease or sale is probably in our best interest. That would be an example of what we're talking about. But if there was a way for a community organization to find some funders or some supporters that could put some basic investment back into the building at a reasonable cost and open up the kind of programs that you're talking about. Again, back to even the park board that Director Arneson mentioned. I know for a time they were looking for spaces for teen center, for lack of a better term. So I think those are all things that we should be soliciting and we should be thinking about as we bring this forward.
Thank you.
Superintendent, no one else in the queue? Like to finish this up?
Yeah, thank you again. I just want to acknowledge that this has been quite a process that we've been through, and I want to highlight the support that we've received from Ryan Strack in helping us develop this, as well as General Counsel Moore, Senior Officer DeVette, Executive Director Hartog. So we're now at a point where we've identified the recommended sites, and we'll move through that process formally with the board and the public, and do expect that in the future we'll have something, should we actually have an interested party, we'll be bringing that back to the board. But as it notes in there, we certainly need a sponsor, either from the board director who represents that area or an at-large sponsor to support any of those ongoing conversations. But just want to acknowledge everyone's work, and like I said, we've been working on this for a couple of years and feel really good about the process that we have now in place to allow us to be both transparent and prudent in our accountability with the facilities that we have. So thank you, Chair Ellison.
Thank you, Superintendent, and I want to thank everyone tonight for this discussion that we've had. Without objection, I will now adjourn this meeting. Our next board meeting will be 5:30 on May 10th.